So far, we've talked a lot about correlation, but I know that you're just aching to find out, how do we actually create correlational coefficients? And that is what I'm going to show you now. We're going to create some correlational coefficients by hand. Now, let's remind ourselves, what are we talking about? The Pearson correlational coefficient was created by Carl Pearson. And the Pearson product moment correlation basically measures how close to a straight line the points on a scatter plot lie. So, invented by Carl Pearson and used by Sir Francis Galton, perhaps made famous by Sir Francis Galton. Because of its inventor, the correlational coefficient is sometimes called Pearson's R. The way that we would compute this coefficient, and let me remind you that Galton and Pearson were doing this by hand and not with just a few data points, sometimes with thousands of data points. It was a time-consuming, laborious process, and I think you're going to appreciate SPSS even more as you see how this correlation is accomplished. So we're going to compute a simple correlation by hand with only a few data points. The way we would do that is to use Excel and take the data that's provided in the notes. We would create an X and a Y column. Then we would create an X squared column, a Y squared column, and a column that represents X times Y. Add up each of those columns, use summation, and then we would plug into a formula. And this is what the formula looks like. As you can see, it's kind of a scary, dangerous looking formula. Lots of sharp corners and edges where you could hurt yourself. So this formula is describing differences and relationships mathematically, and we would get to the numbers to plug into this formula using Excel and summation. What I've given you here, and this is of course also in your notes, are the summations of x, y, x squared, y squared, x times y, and then the x and y values themselves squared. Those values would get plugged into the formula. If you'd like to practice with this, feel free to take those numbers that I've given you, plug them into the formula, and see if you come up with negative 0.95. This formula does work, and it was the formula that was used for many, many years, but we don't have to calculate correlational coefficients by hand any longer. Hopefully now you have a little better appreciation for what our scientific and statistical forefathers went through as Pearson and Galton were computing these coefficients by hand. So let's leave the by hand example and move on to computing correlations in SPSS.